At Christmas dinner, my mother said my son didn't belong in this family, and everyone stayed quiet, like it was normal, like he was invisible. But what they didn't know was I had spent the last 6 years paying for that house. Every bill, every mortgage, every dollar. And that night, I decided I wasn't leaving empty-handed. Chapter 1. The Photo That Erased Him. The house looked exactly the same as it always had in December, wrapped in warm yellow lights, the front porch lined with fake pine garlands that my mother insisted on reusing every year, even though half of them had started shedding plastic needles onto the floor. From the outside, nothing had changed. From the outside, it still looked like the kind of place people slowed down to admire. I parked along the curb and turned off the engine, my hands resting on the wheel for a second longer than necessary. Liam was already unbuckling in the passenger seat, his voice light, hopeful, like it always was when we came here. "Are they all inside already?" "Yeah," I said, glancing toward the glowing windows. "They're probably waiting." He smiled at that. Of course he did. I reached for the door handle, then stopped, just for a moment, the same quiet hesitation I never talked about, not even to myself. Then I opened the door and stepped out into the cold. The front door opened before we even reached it. Margaret stood there, her smile already in place, practiced, effortless. "There you are." She hugged me quickly, barely brushing her cheek against mine, then turned to Liam. "Hi, sweetheart." She didn't say his name. He didn't seem to notice, or maybe he did and he was just better at pretending than I ever was at his age. We stepped inside, the warmth hitting us immediately, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles filling the air. Voices overlapped in the living room, laughter rising and falling in familiar rhythms. Everything felt exactly like it always had, and that was the first problem. I took off my coat, helping Liam with his, and followed the sound of conversation into the living room. That was when I saw it. The photo sat right above the fireplace, framed in polished wood, lit just enough by the string lights draped across the mantel. It was new. I hadn't seen it before. Everyone was there. My parents, Nadine, her husband Trevor, their kids lined up in front, smiling wide, perfectly arranged like something out of a holiday catalog. I stepped closer without realizing I was moving, and then I saw what was missing. Liam stood next to me in the original shot. I knew he did. I remembered that day, the way he had leaned slightly into me, his hand tucked into mine. But in the photo, that space was empty, not blurred, not cropped, cut. His face, his body, everything about him had been removed, leaving behind a slight imbalance in the composition that no one else would probably notice. But I did. I stared at it longer than I should have. No one said anything. Not a single person in the room acknowledged it. Conversations continued behind me. Someone laughed at something Trevor said. Nadine's voice carried over the rest, bright and confident as always. I didn't react. I didn't ask. I just stood there for another second, letting the realization settle somewhere deep and quiet. Then I turned back around like nothing had happened. Dinner was already being set when we moved into the dining room. Plates clinked against the table, chairs scraped lightly against hardwood floors, the kind of noise that filled space so no one had to think about anything else. Liam sat beside me, his legs swinging slightly under the table, trying to keep up with the energy around him. He leaned closer to me. "Mom, I got picked for the science fair," he said softly. "That's amazing," I started, turning toward him, but before I could finish, Nadine cut across the table. "So the open house last week," she said, not even looking at us. "You wouldn't believe the offer we got within 2 hours." Everyone turned to her. Of course they did. Trevor laughed, adding something about the market. My dad chimed in with a question. My mom nodded along like it was the most important thing anyone had said all evening. Liam stopped talking. I felt it before I looked at him, that small shift, that pause in the middle of a sentence where a kid decides whether it's worth finishing or not. He smiled instead, a quick, polite thing, then reached for his fork. I watched him for a second longer than necessary before he set it down beside him. No one noticed. Or maybe they did. Maybe they just didn't think it mattered. The room grew louder again, conversations overlapping, wrapping paper crinkling, laughter rising and falling like background noise in a place that had never really been quiet. Liam drifted toward the corner with the other kids, trying to join whatever game they had started. At first, they let him stand there. Then they adjusted, subtly, a step to the side, a shift in position, enough to leave him just outside the circle. He didn't push. He didn't ask. He just stood there for another second, then slowly stepped back. I watched him from across the room, my hands resting in my lap, my body still, like if I didn't move, maybe I wouldn't have to acknowledge what I was seeing. Someone called out a name, not his, but close enough that he turned his head anyway. No one corrected it. No one bothered to say his name right. I felt that one deeper than the rest, because names matter. They always have. Margaret's voice cut through the noise a little later, drifting from the kitchen where she stood with Aunt Carla. She wasn't whispering, not really. "He doesn't really fit in with this family," she said. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. Clear enough that I didn't have to strain to hear it. Clear enough that I knew she didn't care if I did. I didn't move. I didn't turn around. I just sat there, my gaze fixed somewhere ahead of me, while something inside me shifted, not violently, not at all at once, but with a kind of quiet certainty that felt heavier than anything loud could ever. A memory surfaced before I could stop it. The same table, the same voices. Me, smaller, younger, trying to explain something, anything, and being told gently, casually, like it wasn't a big deal. "Don't make things weird, Alara. Just go with it." Nadine laughing at something unrelated. My parents smiling like everything was exactly how it should be. I had learned to adjust, to shrink, to stay quiet when it was easier for everyone else. I had told myself that that was what being part of a family meant. I looked across the room again. Liam had found a seat by himself now, the toy car box still unopened beside him. He wasn't crying. He wasn't asking questions. He was just quiet. And I recognized that kind of quiet. I had lived in it for years. I wasn't going to watch him learn it. Not here. Not from them. I stood up slowly, moving toward the fireplace without saying anything to anyone. The photo was still there. Perfect. Carefully arranged. Everyone exactly where they were supposed to be. Except him. I reached out, not touching it, just hovering my hand near the frame, close enough to see the faint edge where the image had been altered. They hadn't erased him cleanly. There was still a trace, a space that didn't quite belong to anyone else. I let my hand fall back to my side. They didn't insult my son. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't do anything that could be pointed to as a single moment of cruelty. They had done something quieter, something easier to deny. They had removed him, and somehow that was worse. I stayed there for another second, long enough to feel the weight of that realization settle into something solid. Then I turned back around like nothing had happened. "You ready to head upstairs for a bit?" I asked. He nodded immediately. "Yeah." We left the noise behind us, the laughter, the conversations, the version of a family that had never really included us the way it pretended. And as we walked down the hallway, I knew something had already changed. Not in them, in me. If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 2. The Favorite and the Useful. Something in me had settled into place. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet line I knew I wasn't going to cross again. Liam fell asleep faster than usual that night, curled toward the edge of the bed in the guest room, one hand still resting on the box with the toy car set. I stood there for a while, watching him breathe, steady and soft, like none of it had touched him, like he hadn't already started learning how to make himself smaller. I turned off the light and closed the door halfway, leaving it open just enough so I could hear him if he called. The house was quieter upstairs, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of quiet that sat on top of things instead of settling them. I didn't go back downstairs. I didn't need to. Morning came earlier than I expected. I woke before the alarm, before the house started moving, before anyone could fill the silence with the same voices from the night before. I slipped out of bed and walked down the hallway, the hardwood floor cold under my feet. The house looked different in the morning light, less polished, less intentional, more real. I moved through it slowly, taking in details I hadn't paid attention to in years. The scuff marks near the baseboards, the way the cabinets didn't quite close evenly, the faint hum of the refrigerator that never stopped. For the first time, I wasn't walking through it as a daughter. I was walking through it as someone who understood exactly what it was and what it wasn't. I stepped into the kitchen just as the coffee machine finished brewing. I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter, staring out the window at the backyard I used to think of as mine. Footsteps came in behind me. Nadine. She didn't say good morning. She moved straight to the fridge, pulled it open, and stood there longer than necessary, like she was deciding what version of herself she wanted to be today. Then she shut it and turned to me. "You're up early." "So are you," I said. She shrugged, grabbing a bottle of water and twisting the cap off with a sharp motion. "I had calls to catch up on. You know how it is." I nodded slightly. I did know how it was, just not in the way she meant. She took a sip, then leaned back against the counter across from me, crossing her arms. There was a pause. Not an awkward one, a deliberate one. "You made things weird last night," she said finally. I let that sit for a second before answering. "Did I?" She gave a short laugh, shaking her head. "You always do this. You come in, act like you're above everything, and then suddenly everyone's walking on eggshells." I took a slow sip of coffee. "Normal for who?" I asked. Her expression shifted just slightly, like she hadn't expected that question. "For everyone," she said. "For this family." I set the mug down on the counter. "Right." She pushed off the counter and stepped closer, her voice lowering but not softening. "You know what I mean. Mom and Dad don't need this right now. It's Christmas. You could just let things be normal for once." I looked at her for a moment. Really looked at her. The way she held herself, the way she spoke like she was the one managing everything, like she had always been at the center of it. And in a lot of ways, she had. "You mean normal like pretending nothing's wrong?" I said. Her jaw tightened. "You always think something's wrong." I didn't answer that. She exhaled sharply, then shifted gears the way she always did when she felt like she was losing control of the conversation. "Anyway," she said, glancing at her phone, "I closed 3 deals this month, one of them over asking within 48 hours. I nodded. "That's good." She waited. For more. For praise. When it didn't come, she filled the silence herself. "The market's insane right now. You have to know how to position things. Presentation matters. Perception matters." I watched her as she spoke. The confidence, the certainty, the way she assumed everyone would follow her lead. And for a second, I almost admired it. Then I remembered where we were standing. She kept talking, casually now, like she had already moved on from the tension. "I actually used this address in one of my listings last week, just as a reference point. People around here recognize it. It helps build trust." I didn't react right away. "You used this address," I said. "Yeah, it's a good area. Solid comps. Clients like seeing something familiar." I let that settle. She didn't see it. Didn't see what she had just said. "You don't live here," I said. "Oh my God, Alara, it's not that literal. It's just marketing. Everyone does it." "Everyone who owns the property does it," I said. She laughed again, but this time it was sharper. "You're being ridiculous." I didn't argue. I didn't need to, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to win the conversation. I was just paying attention. There was a difference. She grabbed her phone off the counter. I have a call in 10 minutes. Try not to start anything before then. She walked out without waiting for a response. I stayed where I was, my hands resting lightly on the counter, my coffee forgotten. It wasn't just emotional. It never had been. That realization didn't hit me like a shock. It settled in like something I had always known but never let myself say out loud. Footsteps sounded in the hallway, lighter this time. Aunt Carla. She appeared in the doorway, already smiling in that careful way that meant she decided something needed to be managed. "There you are," she said, stepping inside. "I was hoping I'd catch you alone." Of course she was. I straightened slightly, but didn't move closer. She came in anyway, lowering her voice just enough to make it feel private. "You know your parents did their best," she said. I didn't respond. She continued, filling the silence the way people always did when they thought they were being reasonable. "They're not perfect, none of us are, but they've always tried to keep this family together." I took a slow breath. Have they? She paused, just for a second. "You know what I mean. Don't make this bigger than it is." I looked at her. "What exactly do you think this is?" I asked. Her expression softened, like she was about to say something kind. "A misunderstanding," she said. That word sat there between us, light and easy, like it could cover everything if you just said it enough times. I nodded once. "Right." She reached out, briefly touching my arm. "Just let things settle, for everyone's sake." For everyone's sake? I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean into it either. She gave my arm a small squeeze, then stepped back, satisfied with whatever she thought she had accomplished, and left the kitchen. I stood there for another moment, then picked up my coffee again. It had gone cold. Voices started to rise in the house as the rest of the family woke up. Doors opening, footsteps moving, the rhythm of people falling back into their roles. I heard Liam's door open upstairs. A few minutes later, he came down, his hair still messy from sleep, his expression careful. "Morning," I said. "Morning." He walked into the kitchen and stood next to me, not reaching for anything, just being there. "You hungry?" I asked. He shrugged. "A little." I grabbed a bowl and poured some cereal, setting it in front of him. He picked up the spoon and started eating, quiet but not withdrawn. Not yet. We moved back into the living room later that morning. The house was louder now, full of movement, conversations overlapping again. The kids gathered near the coffee table, pulling out games, arguing over rules, the usual chaos. Liam hovered at the edge. I watched him for a second, then forced myself to look away, to give him space, to let him try. He stepped forward slowly, joining the group. At first, no one said anything. Then one of the kids, I didn't even catch which one, looked at him and tilted their head slightly. "You're not really part of this family, right?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't said with cruelty. It was worse than that. It was casual, like a fact. Liam froze, just for a second. Then he shrugged, a small, practiced movement. "I guess," he said, and stepped back. I was already moving before I realized it. I crossed the room in a few steps, stopping just short of them. "That's not true," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was enough. The kids went quiet. Liam looked up at me, surprised. I held his gaze for a second, then placed my hands lightly on his shoulder. "Come on," I said. "Let's grab something." He nodded immediately. We walked out of the room together, the noise picking back up behind us like nothing had happened, like it never did. I didn't go far, just enough to step into the hallway, away from the center of it all. Liam leaned slightly into me. "I'm okay," he said. "I know," I said. And he was. That was the problem. He was learning how to be okay with things he shouldn't have to be okay with. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking. Then he pulled away, heading toward the kitchen again, like he was trying one more time to be part of something that didn't make space for him. I watched him go. He didn't cry, he didn't complain, he just adjusted. And that was when it hit me fully, clearer than anything else had. This wasn't about me anymore. It hadn't been for a while. I turned my head slightly, looking back toward the living room, toward the voices, the laughter, the version of a family that only worked if you knew how to disappear inside it. Then I looked back at my son, sitting at the edge of the table, quiet, not broken, not yet. I felt something settle into place inside me, deeper this time, heavier. Not anger, not even hurt, just certainty. Because I had spent years learning how to exist in a space that required me to be less. I wasn't going to let him do the same, and this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 3. What They Never Paid Back. I didn't raise my voice and I didn't confront anyone right away. But something in me had already crossed a line I wasn't going to step back over. The house felt smaller that morning, not physically, but in the way everything seemed easier to see through. Every conversation, every glance, every carefully ignored moment had edges now. I waited until the noise of the house swallowed itself again before I stepped outside. The air was colder than the night before, sharper, cleaner. I stood on the edge of the driveway and pulled out my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I found the name I hadn't touched in years. Daniel Reeves. I hesitated for half a second, then pressed call. He picked up on the third ring. "Alara, it's been a while." "It has," I said, my voice steady. "What can I do for you?" I glanced back at the house, at the windows glowing with the illusion of warmth. "I need to confirm something," I said, "about the property on Westlake Ridge." There was a brief pause, the sound of him shifting papers on the other end. "All right, what about it?" "I'm still the sole owner, correct?" This time the pause was longer, more deliberate. "Yes," he said, "you are. The title hasn't changed. You're listed as the primary and only owner since the refinance in 2018. And there's nothing in the agreement that transfers ownership back to my parents." "No," he said. "There was no reversion clause, no conditional transfer. Legally, the property is yours." I closed my eyes for a second, not because I didn't know the answer, but because hearing it out loud made it final. "Thank you," I said. "If you're dealing with something," he added carefully, "you might want to come in and go over everything in person, just to be safe." "I will," I said. "Soon." I ended the call and stood there for another moment, letting the quiet settle around me. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It never had been. I went back inside like nothing had happened. The house was louder now, filled with overlapping conversations and the clatter of dishes. Nadine's voice carried from the living room, confident, animated, like she owned the space. I moved past it, straight to the guest room, closing the door behind me. Liam wasn't there. Good. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened my laptop. The files were still there. Every statement, every payment, every record I had never deleted, even when I told myself I didn't need them. I opened the first document, the year everything had shifted, even if I hadn't realized it at the time. Flashback came in pieces, not all at once. My mother sitting across from me at the same house, her hands folded neatly on the table. "It's just temporary," she had said. "We just need your name for the refinance. Your credit is better." Richard had nodded beside her. "We'll handle the payments," he added. "This is just to get us through a rough patch." I believed them. Or maybe I had just wanted to. I scrolled down to the next file, the first payment I made, $2,400. Then the next, and the next. Months turned into years. Another memory surfaced, sharper this time. I was standing in my kitchen, pressing phone to my ear. "It's just one more month," my mother had said. "Things have been tight." I looked at my bank account, at the numbers that were starting to matter more than I wanted to admit. Okay, I had said. Another file, another year, another excuse. We didn't expect expenses to stack like this. We'll catch up soon. You know we would never take advantage of you. I stopped scrolling. The words sat there in my mind, familiar, rehearsed. I had chosen silence every time. Not because I didn't see it, because I didn't want to make it real. A knock on the door pulled me back. I closed the laptop quickly. "Yeah?" I said. The door opened and Margaret stepped in, her expression already tight. "What are you doing in here?" she asked. "Working," I said. She looked at me for a second, like she was trying to decide how direct she wanted to be. "You've been distant," she said. I didn't answer right away. "I've been observing," I said finally. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Observing what?" I met her gaze. Everything. The silence stretched between us. Then she sighed, stepping further into the room. "You're making things uncomfortable for everyone." I stood up slowly. "Did you ever plan to pay me back?" The question landed harder than I expected. She blinked once, caught off guard. "That's not how family works," she said quickly. That wasn't my question. Her expression hardened. "We took care of you your whole life, and now you're keeping score? I'm asking if you ever intended to pay me back." She crossed her arms. "You're twisting things." "I'm clarifying them." The door opened behind her. Richard stepped in. "What's going on?" he asked. "She's starting something again," Margaret said. I didn't look at her. I looked at him. "Did you ever plan to pay me back?" I repeated. He let out a short breath, like the question itself was ridiculous. "You're imagining problems that don't exist." I felt something settle deeper inside me. Not anger, recognition. "This isn't imagination, it's math." He shook his head. "You've always had a way of making things more complicated than they need to be." Before I could respond, Margaret added, almost casually, "Liam's the same way, too sensitive. That's probably where the problem starts." The words hung in the air. For a second, everything else disappeared. That was the first time they said it out loud, not just ignoring him, blaming him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't react the way they expected. I just looked at her. "That's not the problem," I said quietly. She didn't answer. Richard shifted, uncomfortable now. "You're overreacting," he said. I nodded once. "Maybe," I said, but I knew I wasn't. They left the room a minute later, the tension following them out like something they didn't want to carry. I sat back down on the bed and opened my laptop again. This time, I didn't scroll slowly. I went through everything, every document, every payment, every piece of proof I had avoided putting together in one place. By the time I was done, the pattern was clear. Not just emotional, systematic. My phone buzzed on the bed beside me. I glanced at the screen. Nadine. I ignored it. It buzzed again, then again. Messages started stacking. "What are you doing? You're making this worse. Mom is upset. You need to fix this." Then another message, longer. "You always do this. You push until everything breaks and then act like it's everyone else's fault." I locked the screen without replying. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't family. It was work. I answered. "Hi, this is Alara." "Hey, Alara, it's Melissa from HR." Her tone was neutral, professional. "Just checking in. We noticed a dip in your recent processing numbers. Everything okay?" I closed my eyes briefly. "Yes," I said. "I've been dealing with some personal things, but I'm on track. I'll have everything caught up by next week." There was a pause. "All right, we trust you. Just wanted to make sure you're good." "I am." We hung up. For a second, I just sat there, the weight of everything pressing in from different directions. Family, work, expectation, but for the first time, it didn't feel overwhelming. It felt clear. I opened the laptop again and started organizing the files, not for myself, for what came next. The printer downstairs whirred to life as I sent the documents through one by one. The sound carried faintly up the hallway, page after page, proof after proof. I waited until everything finished, then went down to collect them. No one stopped me. No one asked what I was doing. They were too busy talking, too busy maintaining whatever version of reality they had decided was easier. I gathered the papers into a neat stack, aligning the edges carefully. Then I found an envelope in the drawer by the counter, plain, unmarked. I slid the documents inside, sealed it, and for the first time since I walked into that house, I felt something close to control. Not over them, over what I was going to do next. I placed the envelope on the table in the guest room and sat beside it for a moment, my hand resting lightly on top. No more conversations, no more waiting, no more pretending. This time, I wasn't going to explain. I was going to show them.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you.
Chapter 4. The Paper They Ignored. The decision didn't feel dramatic when it finally happened. It felt quiet, like something that had been building for years had finally found its direction. Dinner that night looked almost identical to the one before. Same table, same plates, same voices filling the room with conversations that never quite included us. Margaret moved around the kitchen like nothing had shifted, like the tension from earlier had dissolved into something manageable, something she could smooth over with routine. Nadine laughed at something Trevor said, her voice bright, controlled, practiced. Richard poured himself a drink and sat at the head of the table like he always did, like nothing in this house could exist without his approval. And Liam sat beside me, quieter than the night before, but still trying, still adjusting. I watched him as he picked at his food, nodding when someone spoke near him, even when it wasn't directed at him. He wasn't withdrawing, he was adapting, and that was worse. The conversation drifted from one topic to another: real estate, work, school, things that sounded important but meant nothing in that moment. I barely heard any of it. My attention stayed on Liam, on the way he leaned forward slightly when someone spoke, like he was trying to be included, on the way no one made space for him. Then Margaret spoke, not loudly, not angrily, just casually, like she was offering a helpful observation. Maybe Liam would be better off somewhere else. The words landed clean. No hesitation, no attempt to soften them, just a statement. The room didn't react right away, because no one thought it was wrong. That was the moment. Not the photo, not the silence, not the years. This. I set my fork down. The sound was small, but it cut through everything for me. I stood up. No one told me to sit back down. No one asked what I was doing. They just watched. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. Plain, unmarked. I placed it in the center of the table. For a second, no one moved. Then Margaret looked at it, confused. "What is this?" she asked. I met her eyes. "Before we talk about where my son belongs," I said, my voice even, "we should talk about where this house belongs." The silence shifted. Not gone, changed. Margaret's expression tightened immediately. "This is our home," she said. I shook my head slightly. "No," I said, "it's just the place you've been living in." Nadine let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Oh my God, here we go again," she said. Richard leaned forward, his tone sharp. "Elara, this is not the time for whatever this is." I didn't respond to him. I just nodded toward the envelope. Margaret hesitated, then reached for it, her fingers slower now, less certain. She opened it, pulled out the first document. Her eyes moved across the page, scanning, trying to understand what she was looking at. Richard stood up, stepping closer. "What is that?" he asked. Margaret didn't answer right away. She flipped to the next page, then the next. I watched the shift happen in real time. Confusion, recognition, something else. "This doesn't mean anything," she said quickly, her voice rising just slightly. I didn't move. "It means everything," I said. Richard took the papers from her hands, scanning them himself. His jaw tightened. "You had no right to do this." I let that sit for a second. "No," I said. "You had no right to assume I wouldn't." Nadine pushed her chair back, standing up now. "You tricked them. You took advantage of them when they were struggling." I looked at her. "I signed what you asked me to sign. I paid what you asked me to pay." Margaret shook her head, her voice sharper now. "That was for the family. You don't get to turn around and use it against us." I held her gaze. "I'm not using anything," I said. "I'm acknowledging it." Her face hardened. "How could you do this to your own parents?" There it was. The shift. Denial. Attack. Victim. Exactly as expected. Richard slammed the papers down on the table. "This is manipulation. You've been planning this." I didn't react to the accusation. "I've been paying for this," I said. Nadine stepped closer now, her voice louder. "You're tearing this family apart over money." I shook my head. "This was never about money," I said. Margaret laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then what is it about?" she asked. I glanced toward Liam. He was still sitting, still quiet, but he was watching now, really watching, and for the first time he wasn't shrinking. I looked back at her. "It's about what you think you can take from me and call it normal." The room went still again, not because they agreed, because they didn't know how to respond. The front door opens behind me. Footsteps, measured, controlled. Daniel Reeves walked in. Richard turned immediately. "Who is this?" he demanded. Daniel didn't react to the tone. "Daniel Reeves, real estate attorney," he said calmly. Margaret looked between us, her confusion turning into something sharper. "You brought a lawyer into our home," she said. I didn't answer her. Daniel stepped closer to the table, glancing down at the documents. "Everything here is accurate. Miss Vance is the sole legal owner of this property. There are no conditions or agreements that transfer ownership back." Richard's jaw tightened. "That's not how this works," he said. "It is exactly how this works," Daniel replied. Nadine stepped forward again. "I've contributed to this family too. That should count for something." Daniel looked at her briefly. "Not legally," he said. That landed harder than anything else, because it left no room for interpretation, no room for emotion, just fact. Margaret's hands were shaking now, the papers slipping slightly between her fingers. "You can't do this," she said. I didn't move. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm stopping something." Richard pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said. I nodded once. "You can." The call didn't take long. Officer Bennett arrived within 20 minutes. The house felt smaller with him inside, the weight of something official pressing into the space. He listened, to Richard, to Margaret, to me. Then he nodded slowly. "This is a civil matter," he said. "There's no criminal issue here." Richard's frustration sharpened. "So you're just going to let her take our home?" The officer shook his head. "I'm not letting anyone do anything," he said. "I'm telling you what the law says." Silence followed that, heavy, unavoidable. Margaret sat down slowly, the paper still in her hands, her expression no longer angry, just uncertain. For the first time, she looked like she didn't know what to say. That was when it finally settled. They had lost control, not just of the house, of the narrative. I picked up the envelope, sliding the documents back inside. "I didn't take anything," I said quietly. "I just stopped pretending it was yours." No one responded. There was nothing left to argue. I turned to Liam. He was already standing, waiting, not hiding, not shrinking, just there. I reached for his hand. He took it without hesitation. We walked toward the door together. No one tried to stop us. No one called after us. The house stayed exactly the same behind us, warm, bright, untouched. But it didn't belong to them anymore. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was taking something back. We stepped outside into the cold air, the door closing quietly behind us, and neither of us looked back.
If this story touched you, please subscribe and let someone out there feel less alone. Thank you. Chapter 5. What Was Left Behind. The cold air hit harder than I expected, but it felt clean in a way the house never did. Liam stayed close to me as we walked to the car, his hand still in mine, his grip steady, not tight, not afraid, just certain. I unlocked the door and we got in without saying much. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Then I started the engine. We didn't talk on the drive back, not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much. And for once, silence didn't feel like something we were forced into. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to reset. When we got back to our apartment, Liam went straight to his room, dropping his jacket on the chair like he always did, then turning back to me. "Are we going back there?" he asked. I shook my head. "No." He held my gaze for a second, searching for something, then nodded. "Okay." That was it. No follow-up questions, no hesitation, just acceptance. I watched him walk into his room, then close the door behind him halfway, the same way I had the night before, only this time it felt different. The phone started ringing before I even sat down. Margaret. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. Richard. Then Nadine. Then numbers I didn't immediately recognize. I muted the phone and placed it face down on the table. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, but it was controlled. That night, I didn't respond to anything. Not the missed calls, not the messages that started stacking one after another. The next morning, I read them. Margaret's messages came first. "We need to talk. This is a misunderstanding. You're taking this too far." Then later, "We didn't mean what happened. You know that." Richard's were shorter. "Call me. We need to fix this." Nadine's were different. "What are you doing? You've gone too far this time. Do you realize what you've done?" Then one that stood out more than the rest. "You're destroying this family." I stared at that one a little longer. Then I put the phone down. Later that day, the calls started coming from extended family. Aunt Carla left a voicemail, her voice calm, measured. "You don't have to agree with everything, but you don't turn your back on your parents like this." Another relative texted, "They're heartbroken." Someone else said, "There has to be another way." The pressure came in waves, not aggressive, not direct, just constant, designed to wear something down. I didn't argue, I didn't explain. Instead, I opened my laptop, pulled up the documents, every payment, every agreement, every signature. I created a folder, uploaded everything, then opened the family group chat. I didn't type a message, I didn't write a single explanation. I just attached the files and sent them. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then the notifications started. One message, then another, then 10. Some didn't believe it at first. "This can't be right. There has to be more to this." Others went quiet. No response, just read. Then a few started asking questions. When was this signed? Why didn't anyone say anything? Margaret replied eventually, "This is being taken out of context. We trusted her. She's twisting things." But the documents didn't argue back. They just existed, and that was enough. Over the next few days, the tone shifted, slowly, subtly. People who had been certain became less vocal. People who defended my parents stopped responding altogether. No one came out and said I was right, but they stopped saying I was wrong, and that mattered. Karma didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It showed up in smaller ways, the kind you couldn't argue with even if you wanted to. I heard about Nadine first, not from her, from someone else. A client had backed out of a deal at the last minute, no explanation, just a withdrawal. Then another. Her name started carrying something different in conversations, not openly negative, just uncertain.
and in her line of work, that was enough. Margaret and Richard struggled to find a new place faster than they expected. Applications went unanswered. A rental they thought was secured fell through after a background check flagged inconsistencies in financial responsibility. They didn't say it directly, but I knew, because I understood exactly what those numbers meant. And for once, I didn't step in to fix it. The call slowed down after that. Not stopped, just less certain, less demanding, more careful. Liam changed in ways that were easier to see. At first, it was small. He started talking more at dinner, not waiting to be asked, just speaking. One afternoon, he walked into the living room while I was working and started telling me about a group project at school. He didn't stop halfway through. He didn't look for permission. He just kept going. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct. I just listened, and he noticed. A few days later, he laughed at something on TV. Not a polite laugh, not a quiet one, a real one. It caught me off guard, not because I hadn't heard him laugh before, because I realized how long it had been since I heard it without hesitation. We didn't talk about what happened, not directly. We didn't need to. The shift was already there. A week later, I drove back to the house, not alone. Liam sat in the passenger seat again, his posture different this time, not hopeful, not nervous, just steady. We didn't knock, we didn't announce ourselves. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house felt the same, but it didn't hold the same weight. Not anymore. We moved through it slowly, not rushing, not avoiding anything, just walking, reclaiming space without needing to say it out loud. Liam wandered into the living room, stopping near the fireplace. The photo was still there, exactly where it had been, unchanged. I stepped up beside him. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I reached up and took the frame off the wall. It was lighter than I expected. I looked at it one last time, at the perfect arrangement, at the empty space where he had been. Then I turned and set it down on the table, not gently, not carefully, just enough to say it was done. I walked over to the cabinet and pulled out a new frame. We had taken the photo a few days before, just the two of us, nothing staged, nothing perfect, just real. I placed it on the mantel, centered, where it belonged. Liam stepped closer, looking at it, then at me. "This one's better," he said. I nodded. "Yeah, it is." The room felt quieter after that. Not empty, just right. I stood there for a moment longer, taking it in, not as something I had won, but something I had corrected, something that should have always been this way. I glanced down at Liam. He wasn't looking at the old photo. He wasn't looking back. He was looking forward. And for the first time, I knew he wouldn't have to learn how to disappear to belong anywhere. I rested my hand lightly on his shoulder. "No one gets erased in this house again," I said. The words didn't feel like a promise. They felt like a fact. Later that night, after everything had settled, after the calls had stopped and the messages had slowed into silence, I sat alone for a moment thinking about how easily everything could have gone a different way. How long I had stayed quiet, how much I had accepted without question, and how close I had come to teaching him to do the same. If protecting your child meant walking away from everything you were taught to hold on to, would you do it?